In 1927, a massive federal raid put a large quantity of Innsmouth residents into federal internment camps. Part of the town and surrounding reef were supposedly blown up. There had been stories of strange people in Innsmouth for years, but the tale of one poor visitor pushed it over the edge, and a secret investigation revealed the true terrors of the town. A young man touring New England as a rite of passage was travelling to Arkham, but the cheapest route involved a bus through Innsmouth, and despite warnings, he decided to go. The bus broke down and he had to stay overnight, finding only horror and terror, causing him to flee down a disused railway track. But worse was to come when he discovered his true lineage. All in The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. To help us grow, please like, subscribe, and be sure to click the bell. But just as importantly, comment and share. The algorithm must be fed, and comments are one of its favourite meals. You might want to help guide our explorations of the strange, dark, and terrible by joining the Eldritch Order on Discord. You can via our Patreon or YouTube, coming soon. We release 3 episodes a week, 2 live streams that chat guides the story on, and complete versions when a story concludes. In part 1, we learn the history of Innsmouth and the reason for the young man's journey. Would you travel there? What do you think we will find in Innsmouth? Let me know in the comments. But for now, it's time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. During the winter of 1927 to 28, federal government officials made a strange and secret investigation of certain conditions in the ancient Massachusetts seaport of Innsmouth. The public first learnt of it in February, when a vast series of raids and arrests occurred, followed by the deliberate burning and dynamiting under suitable precautions of an enormous number of crumbling, worm-eaten and supposedly empty houses along the abandoned waterfront. Uninquiring souls let this occurrence pass as one of the major clashes in a spasmodic war on liquor. Keener news followers, however, wondered at the prodigious number of arrests, the abnormally large force of men used in making them, and the secrecy surrounding the disposal of the prisoners. No trials or even definite charges were reported, nor were any of the captives seen thereafter in regular jails of the nation. There were vague statements about disease in concentration camps, and later about dispersal in various naval and military prisons, but nothing positive ever developed. Complaints from many liberal organisations were met with long confidential discussions, and representatives were taken on trips to certain camps and prisons. As a result, these societies became surprisingly passive and reticent. Newspaper men were harder to manage, but seemed largely to cooperate with the government in the end. Only one paper, a tabloid, always discounted because of its wild policy, mentioned the deep diving submarine that discharged torpedoes downward in the marine abyss just beyond Devil Reef. That item, gathered by chance in a haunt of sailors, seemed indeed rather far-fetched, since the low, black reef lies a full mile and a half out from Innsmouth harbour. But at last I'm going to defy the ban on speech about the thing. Results, I'm certain, are so thorough that no public harm, save a shock of repulsion, could ever accrue from a hinting of what was found by those horrified raiders at Innsmouth. For my contact with this affair has been closer than that of any other layman, and I have carried away impressions which are yet to drive me to drastic measures. It was I who fled frantically out of Innsmouth in the early morning hours of July 16, 1927, and whose frightened appeals for government inquiry and action brought upon the whole reported episode. I was willing enough to stay mute while the affair was fresh and uncertain. But now that it is an old story with public interest and curiosity gone, I have an odd craving to whisper about those few frightful hours in that ill-rumoured and evilly shadowed seaport of death and blasphemous abnormality. I never heard of Innsmouth till the day before I saw it the first and so far last time. I was celebrating my coming of age by a tour of New England, sightseeing, antiquarian and genealogical, and had planned to go directly from ancient Newburyport to Arkham, whence my mother's family was derived. I had no car, but was travelling by train, trolley and motor coach, always seeking the cheapest possible route. In Newburyport, they told me that the steam train was the thing to take to Arkham, and it was only at the station ticket office, when I demurred at the high fare, that I learned about Innsmouth. The stout, shrewd-faced agent, whose speech showed him to be no local man, seemed sympathetic towards my efforts at economy, and made a suggestion that none of the other informants had offered. "You could take that old bus, I suppose," he said, with a certain hesitation. "But it ain't thought of much hereabouts. It goes to Innsmouth. You may have heard about that, and so the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, John Sargent, but never gets any custom from here or Arkham either, I guess. Leaves the square from Hammond's drugstore at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m, unless they've changed lately. Looks like a terrible rattletrap. I've never been on it." That was the first I ever heard of shadowed Innsmouth. Any reference to a town not shown on common maps or listed in recent guidebooks would have interested me, and the agent's old manner of allusion roused something like real curiosity. I asked the agent to tell me something about it. He was very deliberate and spoke with an air of feeling slightly superior to what he said. "Innsmouth? Well, it's a queer kind of town down in the mouth of the Monnoxet. Used to be almost a city, quite apart before the War of 1812, but all gone to pieces in the last 100 years or so. No railroad now. B&M never went through, and the branch line from Rowley was given up years ago. More empty houses than there are people, I guess, and no businesses to speak of except fishing and lobstering. Everybody trades mostly either here or in Arkham or Ipswich. Once they had quite a few mills, but nothing left now except for one gold refinery running in the leanest kind of part-time. That refinery, though, used to be a big thing, and Old Man Marsh, who owns it, must be richer than Croesus. Queer old duck, though, and sticks mighty close to his own home. He's supposed to have developed some skin disease or deformity late in life, but that makes him keep out of sight. Grandson of Captain Obed Marsh, who founded the business. His mother seems to have been some kind of foreigner. They say a South Sea Islander. So everybody raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about Innsmouth people. And folks here and hereabouts always try to cover up any Innsmouth blood they have in them. But Marsh's children and grandchildren look just like anybody else so far as I can see. I've had them pointed out to me here. Though, come to think of it, the elder children don't seem to be around lately. Never saw the old man. And why is everybody so down on Innsmouth? Well, young fella, you mustn't take too much stock in what people around here say. They're hard to get started, but once they do get started, they never let up. They've been telling things about Innsmouth, whispering them mostly, for the last 100 years, I guess. And I gather they're more scared than anything else. Some of the stories would make you laugh about old Captain Marsh, driving bargains with the devil and bringing imps out of hell to live in Innsmouth, or about some kind of devil worship and awful sacrifices in some place near the wharves that people stumbled on around 1845 or thereabouts. But I come from Peyton, Vermont, and that kind of story don't go down with me. You ought to hear, though, what some of the old-timers tell about the Black Reef off the coast. Devil Reef, they call it. It's well above water a good part of the time, and never much below. But at that, you could hardly call it an island. The story is that there is a whole legion of devils seen sometimes on that reef, sprawled about or darting in and out of some kind of cave near the top. It's a rugged, uneven thing, a good bit over a mile out, and towards the end of shipping days, sailors used to make big detours just to avoid it. That is, sailors that didn't hail from Innsmouth. One of the things they had against old Captain Marsh was that he was supposed to land on it sometimes, at night, when the time was right. Maybe he did, but I dare say the rock formation was interesting. And it's just barely possible he was looking for pirate loot, and maybe finding it. But there was talk of his dealing with demons there. Fact is, on the whole, it was really the captain that gave the bad reputation to the reef. But that was before the big epidemic of 1846, when over half the folk in Innsmouth was carried off. They never did quite figure out what the trouble was, but it was probably some foreign kind of disease brought from China or somewhere by the shipping. It surely was bad enough that there was riots over it and all sorts of ghastly doings that I don't believe ever got outside of town, and it left the place in an awful shape. Never came back. There can't be more than 300 or 400 people living there now. But The real thing behind the way folks feel is simply race prejudice. And I don't say I'm blaming those that hold it. I hate those Innsmouth folks myself, and I wouldn't care to go to their town. I suppose, though I can see you're a Westerner by your talk, that a lot of New England ships used to have to do with queer parts in Africa, Asia, and the South Sea, and everywhere else, and what queer kinds of people they sometimes brought back with them. You probably heard about the Salem man that came home with the Chinese wife, and maybe there's still a bunch of Fiji Islanders somewhere around Cape Cod. Well, there must be something like that back of the Innsmouth people. The place was always badly cut off from the rest of the country by marshes and creeks, and we can't be sure about the ins and outs of the matter. But it's pretty clear that old Captain Marsh must have brought home some odd specimen when he had all 3 of his ships in commission back in the 20s and 30s. There's certainly a strange kind of streak in the Innsmouth folks. Today, I don't know how to explain it, but it sort of makes you crawl. You notice a little in Sergeant if you take his bus. Some of them have queer, narrow heads with flat noses and bulgy, starey eyes that never seem to shut, and their skin ain't quite right. Rough and scabby, and the sides of their necks are all shriveled or creased up. Get bald too, very young. The older fellows look the worst. Fact is, I don't believe I've ever seen a very old chap of that kind. Guess they must die of looking in the glass. Animals hate them. They used to have lots of horse trouble before autos came in. Nobody can ever keep track of those people, and state school officials and census men have a devil of a time. You can bet that prying strangers ain't welcome around Innsmouth. I've heard personally of more than one business or government man that's disappeared there, and there's loose talk of one who went crazy and is out at Danvers now. They must have fixed up some awful scare for that fellow. That's why I wouldn't go at night if I was you. I've never been there and have no wish to go, but I guess a daytime trip couldn't hurt you, even though the people hereabouts will advise you not to make it. If you're just sightseeing and looking for old-time stuff, Innsmouth ought to be quite a place for you. And so I spent part of that evening at the Newburyport Public Library, looking up data about Innsmouth. The Essex County histories on the library shelves had very little to say, except the town was founded in 1643, noted for shipbuilding before the Revolution, a seat of great marine prosperity in the early 19th century, and later a minor factory centre using the Manuxeter's power. The epidemic and riots of 1846 were very sparsely treated, as if they had formed a discredit to the country. References to the decline were few, though the significance of the later record was unmistakable. After the Civil War, all industrial life was confined to the Marsh Refining Company, and the marketing of gold ingots formed the only bit of major commerce aside from the eternal fishing. Most interesting of all was a glancing reference to the strange jewellery associated with Innsmouth. It had evidently impressed the whole countryside more than a little, for mention was made of specimens in the museums of the Miskatonic University at Arkham and in the display room of the Newburyport Historical Society. I resolved to see the local sample, said to be a large, queerly proportioned thing evidently meant for a tiara, if it could be possibly arranged. The librarian gave me a note of introduction to the curator of the society, a Miss Anna Tilton, who lived nearby, and after a brief explanation, that ancient gentlewoman was kind enough to pilot me into the closed building, since the hour was not outrageously late. The collection was a noticeable one indeed, but in my present mood I had eyes for nothing but the bizarre object which glistened in a corner cupboard under the electric lights. It took no excessive sensitiveness to beauty to make me literally gasp at the strange, unearthly splendour of the alien, opulent fantasy that rested there on a purple velvet cushion. The longer I looked, the more the thing fascinated me, and in this fascination there was a curiously disturbing element hardly to be classified or accounted for. I decided that it was the queer, otherworldly quality of the art which made me uneasy. It was as if the workmanship were that of another planet. The patterns all hinted at remote secrets and unimaginable abysses in time and space, and the monotonously aquatic nature of the reliefs became almost sinister. Among these reliefs were fabulous monsters of abhorrent grotesqueness and malignity, wholly primal and awesomely ancestral. At times I fancied that every contour of these blasphemous fish frogs was overflowing with the ultimate quintessence of unknown and inhuman evil. In odd contrast to the tiara's aspect was its brief and prosy history as related by Miss Tilton. It had been pawned for a ridiculous sum at a shop in State Street in 1873 by a drunken Innsmouth man, shortly afterward killed in a brawl. Miss Tilton was inclined to believe that it formed part of some esoteric pirate hoard discovered by old Captain Obed Marsh. This view was surely not weakened by the insistent offers of purchase at a high price, which the Marshes began to make as soon as they knew of its presence, and which they repeated to this day, despite the Society's unvarying determination not to sell. As the good lady showed me out of the building, she assured me that the rumours of devil worship were partly justified by a peculiar secret cult that had gained force there and engulfed all the Orthodox churches. It was called, she said, the Esoteric Order of Dagon, and was undoubtedly a debased quasi-pagan thing imported from the East a century before, at a time when Innsmouth fisheries seemed to be going barren. Its persistence among a simple people was quite natural in view of the sudden and permanent return of abundant fine fishing, and it soon came to be the greatest influence in the town. All this, to the pious Miss Tilton, formed an excellent reason for shunning the ancient town of decay and desolation. But to me, it was merely a fresh incentive, and I could scarcely sleep in my small room at the Y as the night wore away. So ends part 1 of the shadow over Innsmouth. In part 2, the traveller takes the bus to Innsmouth and starts to discover the horrors that make it best to avoid the town. Remember to comment on whether you would catch that bus and what you think we will find. The most deserving comment will be pinned to the top. If you enjoyed the tale, it helps us if you let others know, so please click the like button and share with others that may be interested. Subscribing will let you travel with us on further adventures of the dark and terrible, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our Eldritch Order on Discord, come visit us on Patreon or YouTube, coming soon. Then you can join in the discussions and even help guide the choice of stories. There is an ever-growing list of insane benefits. See the description for details of the Patreon and for a link to Canje Studios to find out how modern board games can help you create your own dark and terrible stories. Until next time, farewell. But never forget, in the depths of the ocean, where light dares not venture, ancient horrors stir, their whispers echoing through the abyss, promising madness to those that listen.